A very good afternoon and many thanks for staying with us right here on NTV Uganda. My name is Romeo Busiku. Now, Sub-Saharan Africa remains a region of stark political and socio-economic contrasts and many long-standing challenges. While a large number of countries have adopted democratic principles of governance, several are still governed by authoritarian and semi-authoritarian leaders. Autocratic regimes, civil strife, weak institutions and unresponsive political systems continue to undermine anti-corruption efforts. According to Transparency International, Uganda ranks second or third in the East African region as the most corrupt country. That is after South Sudan and Burundi. So Uganda could be the third in that regard. The judiciary and police have also been singled out as the most corrupt entities in government. In respect to the Anti-Corruption Week, which is being observed under the theme promoting social accountability through active citizenry, my studio panelists shall devise avenues through which the citizens can actively engage in the fight against corruption. To discuss this and more, I'm now joined by Mr. Agaba Malon, the Program Manager, Anti-Corruption Coalition Uganda, and Mr. Peter Wandera, the Executive Director, Transparency International Uganda. Both gentlemen join me right now in studio. A very good afternoon, Peter and Malon.
Thank you.
Yes, let me start with you, the Executive Director, Transparency International. First things first, let's get an up-close look at some of the implementing partners who have been engaged in this fight since time immemorial. I'm talking about Transparency International Uganda, Anti-Corruption Coalition Uganda, where Malon is from, and also we do have the Action Aid International Uganda, the three implementing partners. Yeah. Shed more light.
Yeah, first of all, these three implementing partners, they take lead among the civil society in fighting corruption. As already mentioned, there's Transparency International Uganda, Anti-Corruption Coalition Uganda, and Action Aid International Uganda. Yeah, maybe I could just shed a bit of light on Transparency International Uganda, then my colleague can also speak about the Anti-Corruption Coalition Uganda. Yeah, Transparency International Uganda, it's the national chapter of the Global Transparency International, which is we are present in over 100 countries, Uganda being one of them. And our main, it's called the Global Movement Against Corruption. So it speaks for itself. Our first mandate is to see how best to fight corruption globally, and in Uganda, that mantle is taken by Transparency International Uganda. Yes, ma'am.
And Mr. Malon Agawa, you represent Anti-Corruption Coalition Uganda. Shed more light.
Yeah, Anti-Corruption Coalition Uganda is a coalition of several other small coalitions that at the regional level we have been in Uganda since 1999, officially registered in 2004. As the name suggests, our mandate is fighting corruption, working with different stakeholders. Like I said, our core membership are our regional partners that we work with, but we also work with the government, we work with the media, we work with our international involvement partners to see a Uganda that is free from corruption.
All right, let's get into the gist of this conversation, starting with you, Mr. Peter Wandera, the Executive Director, Transparency International Uganda. Simple question. What is corruption, and what role have you played as civil society organizations to fight and end corruption in its tracks?
Yeah, corruption has a number of definitions depending on who is defining it, but they all usually mean the same, although different words are used. For us in Transparency International, we define corruption as the abuse of entrusted power for personal gain. Yeah, once a person is entrusted with power, be it big power, small power, and you abuse it in order for you to personally gain from it, that's corruption. Be it an askari at the gate, he has power to allow you in or out, but if he abuses that power by forcing you to pay a bribe, that is corruption. If you're given a high office, let's say Minister, Permanent Secretary, whatever, and use your office to personally gain from that office, you're abusing that entrusted power that has been given to you. Yeah, so once you abuse it, that's corruption. And corruption is wide. It can involve embezzlement, it can involve bribery, it can involve extortion, it can involve nepotism. Once there's abuse of that entrusted power, that's corruption. Yeah, and coming to your second question, what has civil society done in the fight against corruption? well, we've done quite a number of things. We've had concerned public anti-corruption campaigns. These campaigns are either thematic or issue-based. It can be a theme. It can be, we can have a campaign on an issue. We have had capacity building of the anti-corruption fighters, practitioners. We train them how do you fight corruption, what is corruption, and all that. We do a lot of media outreach like what we are doing right now. We got the media, we reach out to the citizens, we reach out to government, etc. Then we also feed into policy review and legal review. You have had a lot of bills coming to Parliament for discussion. They usually call upon us, especially bills that are connected with corruption work. We feed into that, and most of the acts you see in place right now, at one time or the other, we have fed into the formulation of those acts. Then we provide reporting platforms. We have toll-free lines to which people can call in, report instances of corruption, and we take it up on their behalf. Because sometimes individually people might not be able to actually come out personally and report this type of corruption. So it's our role to be the middle guys who face the music on the citizens' behalf. Yes.
All right. Mr. Malonagaba, we've been talking about corruption since time immemorial. We've created all these sensitization campaigns, but then corruption still persists. Do you think it's time now more than ever that we, employed a more hands-on approach? Remember, you have the judiciary and police, according to the Bribery Perception Index, being actually singled out as the most corrupt entities in Uganda. Do you think this government has dropped the ball and we need a more hands-on approach?
Okay, one, I think already a lot has been done, but probably we need to do a critical assessment to know where we're not doing well and see how we can improve. When you look at the government, for instance, they have done quite well in terms of enactment of laws. We have over 10 anti-corruption laws. We have several institutions, actually over 10 institutions of government supposed to be fighting corruption. But then, again, like you asked, the question is, why is corruption going up? And there are several reasons that could probably respond to that. One is that much as we have the anti-corruption laws in place, the implementation has been poor. I've been doing several studies assessing the implementation of anti-corruption laws, and you find that for some laws the implementation is at 20%, some laws it's at 50%, and even several studies have been done globally in terms of enactment of laws. We are doing quite well, but when it comes to implementation, we are given around 50%, then enactment 90%. So there's a huge gap between having the laws and then the actual implementation. Secondly, you find that even the institutions put in place, especially the legally mandated institutions, they haven't been supported. When you look at the Inspectorate of Government, for instance, and other institutions, they have challenges regarding issues like funding, issues like staffing, and other challenges that have to be addressed. And again, so you have to look at those two aspects, but also when you look at the at the current regime that we have, is it enough just to prosecute a person, go to prison and come back and enjoy the proceeds of crime? So we need to now start looking at things like asset recovery. If somebody has been convicted, how would we recover back the money stolen? When you look at the Global Integrity Report for 2017, it says that Uganda annually loses $1 billion through corruption. Yeah, that is 3.7 trillion. But when you look at the recoveries, IG maybe recovers around 2.7 billion annually. Then the State House Anti-Corruption Unit around 20 billion, and maybe a few other agencies of government. So there is a huge gap between what is lost and what is recovered. So as you're talking about the proactive approach, we need to look at asset recovery as important. But also, secondly, one of the things that we are rooting for is the issue of non-conviction-based asset recovery. There are instances where the corrupt are sharp, they get through the system and they are never convicted. They know They know how to find their ways in the system. But when there is evidence in terms of having property that cannot be explained by their salaries that they receive, so can we look at a regime that you can still, if you cannot sufficiently provide evidence that you have earned property legally, the state can take it away from you? It is something that we'll also have to look at. But also when you look at the other aspect is the whole aspect of lifestyle audit. I mean, if you are living larger than what you earn, then the question should be, where are you getting that money from? So we should look at that. Now, when you look at asset recovery and non-conviction based asset recovery, we don't have comprehensive legal regimes for that, and they can easily be challenged. So we need to have enforcement in that regard. Then when you come to the whole aspect of political will, yes, people have been saying that maybe there is political will, but in my opinion, I'll say that the political will is still limited. When you look at, yes, we have the laws, but the implementation is very poor. We have the anti-corruption institutions, but which even the president acknowledged at one time that they have been infiltrated by some wrong elements. So they have to be empowered as well. They have their own weaknesses. So we need to look at it much more holistically. But again, coming to the whole aspect of political will is that if you have these institutions and have challenges, do you create other institutions, or you have to empower the institutions that are legally mandated to do that kind of work? Then secondly, like right now, coming back to the aspect of political will, look at the aspect of funding. Still the funding has been limited to these agencies. We've been doing studies and funding is still limited. They have serious funding gaps. But also when you look at a key position, for instance, like the Inspector General of Government, that hasn't been filled for some time. How comes the priority given to other sectors is not the priority given to accountability? How can you have a long period of time without an Inspector General of Government, which of course hinders work of the Inspectorate of Government, and nobody seems to be bothered?
But also there is also the issue of the whistleblowers. How best can we protect them? I know we have the Whistleblowers Act, but it only protects you while you're in court. After that, you're on your own. Do you think some of those factors negate the concerted fight against corruption?
Actually, it doesn't even protect you when you're in court. The Whistleblowers Protection Act only protects you when you report, within that time between reporting and whistleblowing. Now, when it comes to giving evidence in court as a witness, it doesn't protect you, and there is no mechanism. And of course, we have had a lot of challenges in terms of protecting whistleblowers that whistleblow, for instance, to us as NGOs. We have had instances where a person whistleblows, is maligned, and then some previous cases come up against him. In the morning, the person is taken to police. By 2 p.m. they're in court, by 3 they're already in prison.
But do you think these are some of the factors that make citizens shy away from reporting some of the unscrupulous individuals engaged in corruption or corrupt
definitely, I agree. People fear because, you know, the corrupt have money and they have their connections. So if people are not assured of their safety, there is no way they feel free to report. But also we have received instances where the same institution supposed to protect whistleblowers are the ones exposing their identities. Somebody tells you that I reported to this particular office. Before I could even vacate the office, the person I reported was already aware, was already telling me, I mean, I know you have reported me. So the whole issue of, first of all, whistleblower protection is so poor, and then even witness protection. And I think that is a very, very big impediment when it comes to involving citizens in the fight against corruption.
I see. Mr. Wandera, the Anti-Corruption Week is being held or observed under the theme Promoting Social Accountability Through an Active Citizenry. But then the $64,000 question pertains to how best our citizens can be helped to actively participate in the fight against corruption. Give us a few pointers.
Yeah, a lot can be done, but just to mention a few. First of all, we should make the citizens aware of their role. We should have extensive public awareness and sensitization of the citizens so that they really appreciate that actually they are also mandated as citizens to join in the fight against corruption. Because once they don't appreciate that, then they cannot come out to involve themselves in the fight against corruption. Then we should also encourage them to speak out, because out there's a lot of silence. People prefer to keep quiet. They prefer minding their own business. Yet in the long run, if corruption takes place, it's the citizen who suffers. If there are not drugs in the hospital and drugs have been misallocated or stolen, it's the citizen who suffers. If the education system, there's a lot of corruption there, and these education materials don't reach the schools, it's the citizen who suffer. But the citizens out there are the first, I could call them the foot soldiers. They can observe these things, they can monitor, they can come out and report. So they have to be encouraged to speak out. And by encouraging them, we should also create platforms through which they can report. I'm aware there are a lot of toll-free lines out there, but how many citizens know those numbers? How many citizens know that actually they have the power to pick a phone call and report any instances of corruption? Yeah, so we should also put there enabling channels for them to report. Then also, they can also get involved in the fight against corruption, but by not being corrupt themselves. Yeah, let them also appreciate that I'm fighting corruption, therefore I as a citizen should not engage in any act of corruption, because you can't fight corruption yet at the same time
you need to be exemplary.
You're corrupt. Yeah, so those are some of the ways through which citizens can come out and join in the fight against corruption.
But what challenges do you foresee while implementing this whole initiative? Because we see a citizenry that has decided to resign when it comes to the fight against corruption, because it involves top officials. Like you mentioned, the Whistleblowers Act is so weak. People's names are being put out there. So don't you think that people, the citizenry, will be so scared to even engage in this fight against corruption?
Yeah, of course that's true. There are a number of challenges involved. The first one being the protection, as my colleague has already mentioned. People fear to report because as witnesses they are not protected, so they are afraid to come out. Then of course there's also the issue of general apathy. People feel that corruption actually is a normal way of life. They get surprised when they come across a person who is not corrupt. Yes, so it becomes a challenge to tell somebody that actually come out and report this corrupt person. They'll say, no, why should I report such a person? The money isn't even yours, it isn't mine. Why am I reporting? It's because they haven't yet appreciated that actually their role as citizens is quite powerful in the fight against corruption. Maybe another challenge that I would bring up is the way we treat the corrupt. The corrupt are glorified. We see them as heroes. We see them as wise men. If you get a job, after 2 years you're expected to have bought a car. After 5 years you're expected to live in your own mansion. So even the society themselves, there's that environment that through which corruption thrives. If as citizens we shun the corrupt, if as citizens we come out and speak against corruption, if we come out and begin questioning ourselves that Mr. Wandera, you have just joined public service, but you have 10 cars in your courtyard, what's happening? But if we remain silent about all that, then it becomes a challenge for the citizen to fight corruption.
Marlon Agaba, we've also noticed that according to the Bribery Perception Index, judiciary and police are the most corrupt entities in Uganda. Would you say, in your opinion, as the programs manager at Anti-Corruption Coalition Uganda, that Uganda has lost the fight to corruption? Would you say that we've regressed?
No, I wouldn't say that we have lost the fight against corruption. Maybe I can say that we have stagnated in the fight against corruption. Like you said, according to the Corruption Perception Index by Transparency International, we have stagnated. 137th position, 140 there. So we have basically stagnated. Talking about the most corrupt institutions, right? Several studies have pointed to the judiciary and to police as the most corrupt institutions, but not meaning that the entire institutions are corrupt, but elements within those institutions. And mostly because these institutions interact so much with the public. When you look at police, people interact so much with the public, with the police rather, and also the judiciary. But we also have seen corruption instances in the other departments, like lands, for instance, like in the tax bodies. So it is widespread. Corruption is everywhere, and already Peter has talked about the whole issue of culturalization, how corruption now has become part of the culture, and how you need a whole culture shift to fight corruption. But coming back on whether we are losing the fight, like I said, we have stagnated in the same position. We have done so well on some areas, like enacting the laws, like I've said, like on setting up the institutions. But now when it comes to other areas that are critical, areas like prosecution, arrests, prosecution, conviction, asset recovery, we are not doing quite well. So I think those are the areas that we probably need to look at going forward.
And have you also noticed an upsurge in corrupt tendencies during this COVID-19 lockdown?
That is not so easy to ascertain right now, because there is so little information in the public domain concerning the expenditures during COVID. You know, we received a lot of money through the local donations, through appropriations of parliament, through grants and loans, and that period hasn't been audited, for instance, by the Office of the Auditor General. And you know that we usually base on those reports. But when we are trying to look even for information, for instance, on procurements, on the government portal, like the portal run by PPDA, that information is very limited. And you know, corruption works quite well and thrives in secrecy. And of course, you have to contextualize that given precedence.
So the lesser the information, the more the chances of corruption to thrive.
Exactly.
I see.
And also given precedence of corruption in this country previously, even when resources have been less, you can only expect corruption to go up when the information is finally in public domain. We have just been seeing bits of corruption here and there. These ones have inflated food, then these issues here and there, but we haven't seen the exact extent of the magnitude. But I think that will come out as the audits are done.
All right, let's also unpack the Anti-Corruption Week with Mr. Peter Wandera. What are some of the various activities that the civil society organizations shall be engaged in during this Anti-Corruption Week?
Yeah, we have a number of activities, but I just mentioned three, which are the major ones. The first one, we had an anti-corruption convention. This brought on board the government representatives, it brought on board civil society, also brought on board the public, in which we're discussing a number of issues surrounding the state of corruption in the country and how best we can involve the citizens in the fight against corruption. And this took place at the beginning of March, that's last week, when the Anti-Corruption Week was beginning. Then we shall also have National Integrity Awards. These awards shall be given out to people who have proved to be persons of integrity, despite...
when is this?
It's supposed to be next week. Next week,
on
the 16th, So out there, we believe that it's important for us to come out and show that actually, if you're not corrupt, we shall appreciate you. If you're not corrupt, we shall recognize you. And this, in a way, shall also encourage others to follow suit, to be persons of integrity.
Indeed. Let us in on the criteria that is followed while choosing that person that is going to be awarded. What do you look at?
We look at a person, first of all, he should have concrete examples of instances where this person has, despite all odds, proved to be a person of integrity. We should be able to document them. They should not be hearsay. It should not be just an abstract. Actually, person nominating, because people are supposed to be nominating. So if you nominate, for example, if I nominated you, Romeo, I should show examples that this gentleman, he has, under such circumstances, he proved to be a person of integrity.
I see.
And it should not be one time. It should be constant. It should not be, because one time that might have been a coincidence or an accident. Then secondly, that person should be an example to others. People should be looking up to him. He should not have done that acts of integrity in secrecy. Should have been in the open, so that, for example, if I've nominated you and I went around the NTV studios, they should be able to say, oh yes, he's a person. There should be that evidence on it. Then secondly, the person being nominated should not be a member of staff of the organizing, of the organizers, the key organizers. That's ActionAid International, ACO, and TIU. Then we're also avoiding politicians, because right now it's a politically charged period.
Indeed, it is.
So we wouldn't want you to nominate a politician, because it might easily be misunderstood. So those shouldn't be nominated at all. Then of course we have a vetting committee which shall be vetting all names, all nominations that have come that have come in at the national level. So even members of the vetting committee and their families, they are not eligible to be nominated. Yeah.
Now, let me also bring in Ms. Marlon Agaba. We've also gotten some information from some analysts who indicate that increased attacks on political analysts like myself and other journalists who do investigative reporting on corruption. You've seen so many reports come out in the news, but then there have been some attacks on those particular authors of those reports. Do you think that such incidences are detrimental to the fight against corruption?
Definitely they are, because I mean the people who are corrupt wouldn't want that information to get in the public domain. And of course some of the tactics used, threats on media houses, there are threats on whistleblowers. Like I said, you have had instances where whistleblowers have been attacked. So definitely those threats are there, and they do hinder people from reporting, especially when the protection mechanism isn't as strong as it should be, especially for whistleblowers and witnesses.
So do you think such factors might actually force us to regress in this fight against corruption?
Definitely they do, because I mean we have done studies, for instance, before where we asked citizens one of the reasons why they wouldn't report corruption and the issue of safety. I mean, people tell you that I will come and report to your office, then for you will be okay with your cases, then they will come back for me. So that is one of the key reasons. And also you need to realize that according to the East African Bribery Index, that at least 84% of the people who encounter corruption, they never report it. And that is one of the reasons they want protection and safety after reporting.
Indeed. Mr. Wandera, you plan to reach the citizenry, because I understand the Anti-Corruption Week is being observed under the theme promoting social accountability, social accountability through an active citizenry. So you're planning to reach out to the people, and we are talking about COVID-19, which is causing debilitating effects. So how are you going to be linking up to these people? What is going to be the mode of communication? If it's the media, what challenges lie ahead?
Yeah, of course we appreciate the circumstances that we are in right now. They are difficult periods. With the COVID-19, we cannot move around as we used to, because we used to move out to the people, carry out public awareness, sensitization, workshops and dialogues. So now we are quite limited. But what we are doing now, we are looking at alternative means to supplement any gaps that we are facing right now because of the COVID-19. One of them is the media, like what we are doing right now. And then we're also having a lot of social media interventions, like we have meetings via Zoom, we have we're active on Twitter, Facebook and so on, to ensure that actually we reach out to our people. Then we're also producing a lot of information material, posters, stickers, you name it, so long as it's information material, because that can be dispatched at once and it's distributed at whatever point. Stickers can be put on vehicles, buildings, etc., and people can read them. Yeah, so we are doing a lot of that, and of course even the newspapers, we're using newspapers a lot, both online and also the actual physical newspapers. Yeah, we shall be having, for example, in this Corruption Week, we shall be having a pull-out in the major newspapers. Yeah, that shall be informing the people, that shall be speaking to the people.
Mr. Peter Wandera is Executive Director for Transparency International Uganda. He's not alone. We also do have Mr. Marlon Agaba. He's the Programs Manager at the Anti-Corruption Coalition Uganda. And you're still watching NTV Uganda. Let's take a short break. We'll be right back with more of this conversation shortly after this breather. Welcome back, and many thanks for staying with us. Of course, we are still talking about corruption in Uganda. How best can we promote social accountability through an active citizenry? The $64,000 question is, how best can we create avenues through which the active citizenry can be engaged and in the fight against corruption? So that's what we are trying to peruse through and get some answers with the Executive Director, Transparency International Uganda, Mr. Peter Wandera, and also the Programs Manager at the Anti-Corruption Coalition Uganda, Uganda. That is Mr. Marlon Agaba. Both gentlemen are with me in studio. Remember, before we went for the short break, according to the Bribery Perception Index, judiciary and the police are the most corrupt entities within Uganda. So if the purveyors of justice are the most corrupt, where does that leave the citizenry in that regard? Peter and Agaba, let's continue with this conversation. I would like to know what challenges you face as civil society organizations while executing your mandate. Let me start with you, Peter.
Yeah, of course, fighting corruption is something not easy. You step on people's toes, you expose people, you interfere in people's plans of getting rich quickly, and so on. So therefore, a lot of challenges come up with our work. The first one, there's intimidation. Intimidation comes directly or indirectly. People can phone in and ask you why you concerned with ABCD.
I thought it was too rife when it comes to us, the journalists.
You know, it also faced the same. Yeah, so people, you get statements like, why are you concerned with this? Is it your money? And so on.
Why don't you just eat money and keep quiet?
Then there's also the problem of politicizing our work. It has been politicized a lot. We are anti-government.
Foreign agents are funding you.
We are funded by the foreign agents and so on. So this also becomes a challenge in that we are completely misunderstood. Of course, people know what we are doing, but they intentionally distort, they politicize our work. That's a challenge. And then there's a challenge of high expectations. When people hear Transparency International Uganda and Corruption Coalition Uganda, the expectations are high that corruption is going to end tomorrow. So there's that pressure. It's quite challenging, whereby people are looking up to you for immediate solutions, which immediate solutions are not forthcoming. Then, of course, the last challenge is the resources. We cannot do as much as we would have wanted to do. Yeah, because if you have limited resources, you cannot have enough interventions to cover everything. Yeah, so those are some of the challenges that we have been meeting.
And of course, Mr. Agaba, Marlon, we are in a very contentious election period. The campaigns are in the offing until January 12th. But then, according to some of the reports I've been seeing from Transparency International Uganda, some of the countries that perform well on the Corruption Perception Index have actually great enforcement of campaign finance regulations and a broader range of political consultation in that regard. But all those factors, they seem like a fairy tale for Uganda. Could it be that the negation of such factors being in Uganda here could be the reason we are seeing a regression in the fight against corruption?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll pick it from the challenges and come to that.
Indeed.
To add on what Peter said in terms of the challenges, the other challenge is the whole challenge of apathy among the citizens.
Wow.
That much as we're doing all this work, people are resigned. It's like they are resigned to their fate. They think that corruption cannot be defeated. And it goes back to the whole issue of culturalization of corruption that I talked about. Corruption being seen now as something that is normal.
Kidogo.
Yeah, people who are corrupt being praised. I mean, now we have come from a culture that hated corruption, that looked at corruption as something quite bad, to one that praises it. When you look at countries doing quite well in the fight against corruption, it begins with, for instance, like Botswana, it begins with the family, the community, before even you go up to the national level. I mean, like in Botswana, if you work for 2 years and you build a very big mansion, the first person to ask you where you got the money from would be your brother or sister or father or mother. But here, if you work for 2 years, and you go back to the village, you have been seeing you on TV, you have been to Makere, but you have nothing to show on the ground, you are looked at as a failure in life. So we have like kind of culturalized corruption. So
people try to live up to that expectation and they end up being corrupt.
Exactly. So that has to be addressed. But also secondly, the other challenges of limited responsiveness from state agencies. We have these good studies we do, we have these recommendations we get even from the citizens, and they are well grounded in research, but when you present them to some of the government agencies, they take long to be worked on or incorporated. So, and again, when the responsiveness of institutions of state is limited, citizens are reporting, but responsiveness is limited, then that creates apathy that we are seeing. It comes from lack of good collaboration and responsiveness from the state agencies. Coming back to elections, I think we are in a period of political corruption, voter bribery, which is two-way, by the way. There are people who are buying the votes, and citizens are actively demanding also, because they see this as the only time to eat, like they've been saying. So it is two-way, that there is the giving side, but there's also the receiving side. And it goes back to the whole political financing in this country. You know, we don't have a comprehensive legal regime for financing. That's why you cannot know where the money these parties are using is coming from. Yeah, people are giving facilitation to people attending rallies here and there, but where is the money coming from? Some of this money could be from wrong elements. It could be money that has come from crime. It's like a process of corruption. Where is this money coming from? And several studies have been done that have shown that on average a member of parliament will spend around 500 million to get elected. I mean, where does that money come from? So, like you said, it goes back to the whole, you know, the political corruption we are seeing now should be put in the context of the bigger corruption in the country. Yeah, and of course, if we don't address the bigger corruption in the country, we cannot address the political corruption. But like we said, one of the aspects we've been looking at is having a role on political financing, especially with a cap, a maximum which a person should spend on political financing. There's no way an MP should be spending 500 million. Some actually go up to 800 million. But on average it's 500. An MP should be spending 500 million to get elected. I mean, when they get in office, the first thing they're thinking is recovering their money. So that's why you've been having issues of, I mean, the debate is poor, then the type of output from parliament is not good, and even other, it's not just parliament, but other positions as well. So
essentially, commercialization of politics is a form of bribery and corruption in its form.
Definitely it is. Political, if you contextualize it as political corruption, it is a form of corruption, and which is rife right now in this period until we finish the election cycle.
Mr. Wandera, of course you authored the report because you're the executive director of the Transparency International Uganda. Just humbly give us your submission on what Mr. Marlon Agaba has mentioned. You do have countries that are performing very well on the Corruption Perception Index simply because they have strong enforcement of campaign finance regulations and a broader range of political consultation. Please go ahead.
Yeah, when we released our report, we made a correlation between countries that are doing very well in the Corruption Perception Index, and also compared with how much commercialization of politics, how much political integrity was in their system. So we found that actually countries that had poor campaign financing laws, that had poor electoral integrity, that had poor consultation, fared very badly in the Corruption Perception Index. Yeah, so it was a way of telling us that actually, if you don't get your politics right, then the fight against corruption cannot be won. Because most of these countries that are doing quite well in terms of the Corruption Perception Index, when you look at their political systems, the electoral systems, their systems of integrity, there's very little commercialization of politics. There it is, they elect ideas, they don't elect money, but here it's mostly money is the one that determines whether you're going to pass through or you're not going to pass through. Yeah, so as a way of fighting corruption, I think one of the steps we should be looking at is to get our politics right. Let's reduce the commercialization of politics. Of course, money is important in any electoral process or campaign process. You have to pay agents, you have to advertise, and so on. But then the amounts being dished out there, they are too much. It's obscene, because a person using 500 million and above, people have even quoted figures of 1 billion. How does he expect to recoup this money? Eventually it's going to compromise the quality of people who are being sent to parliament, because now it's not ideas that are working, it's money. Then also this violence we are seeing out there, it's because people have invested a lot of money,
and losing is not an option. Yeah,
losing is not an option. Person would rather hire goons to take care of you than lose all this money. Yeah, so if we don't work on it, then corruption shall keep on perpetuating itself, because you send a person to parliament, he has to recoup his money, he has to see how to get this money, and he can only get it through corrupt means. Then the people you have sent to parliament, you have compromised their quality, and we get most of our officials, ministers and so on from the same parliament.
According to the information you're giving me, Mr. Gaba and Peter, it seems like it's the leaders who are propagating this behavior of over-commercialization of politics. So if the leaders themselves are engaged in corruption, then how will the citizenry at the bottom react or even act in that regard? Don't you think that's the reason why we are seeing a deep regression, a deep culture of corruption within Uganda, because it's already from the top to the bottom?
Yeah, as you rightly put it, a lot of leaders are engaged in corruption, and they don't want to lose, because that would lose their avenue to quick resources.
But instead they are losing the public and their confidence in them. But what will it take for us to flip the page, to subdue this callous development? What will it take?
Yeah, first of all, we should consider having some strict laws on campaign financing. We should consider having a cap on it. Some countries have done it. Then there are also laws out there, laws that touch on issues of bribery, issues of extortion and so on. We should also apply those laws. Why should a person bribe openly and the laws don't catch up with him? Another person will be encouraged that this is the way to go, I'll also bribe. So also those laws, they're in place. Let them be put into action. Then another way is to encourage as much transparency as possible. I'm aware there's a law that requires the political parties to declare how much they have used, where they're getting money, and account for every single penny they have used. But how many do it? And once we are silent on all that, people are encouraged to engage in corruption, as Melon said earlier on. Once there's silence, once there's lack of transparency, then people shall be encouraged to be corrupt. But if everything is in the open, there's full accountability, there's transparency. If I'm an MP, I would feel very uneasy spending 1 billion for a campaign, yet my constituency doesn't even have a health center worth 100 million. I wouldn't want that to appear, so I would be cautious on how much I spend. Yeah, so it would be self-regulating. There's transparency, all this money is in the open. How do I come up and spend this obscene amount of money? Yet I know that eventually I'll have to report on it. But people know that they won't report on it.
Indeed.
So they go ahead.
A quick observation, Mr. Peter Wandera. It seems like it all goes back to the citizen, to the electorate, to the voter. If you come with your 500 million and you give it to me, Romeo, vote for me, and I say no, I've actually put a small stone on the fight against corruption. I've added something onto that. So let me bring you in, Mr. Malonagaba. What role should the citizenry be playing in this fight against corruption?
Yeah, thank you very much. In corruption, there are two sides, like I've already said. There is the giving side and the receiving side. And both of them are equally culpable. So citizens have a big role to play. One, of course, saying no to corruption. That is quite important, especially like now during this political season. They should stand their ground and say no. Because I've seen some people giving advice that you can eat the money and still vote
the other side.
I mean, your favorite candidate. But that is also wrong. I mean, if it is no to corruption, it is not corruption.
You're feeding a cycle.
Yeah, they should be able in position to report corruption. Because I mean, like I gave you the other study from East African Barberga Index that 84% of the people who encounter corruption don't report it. So if the citizens don't report, then they are detrimental the fight against corruption. So citizens are expected to report and be active in the fight against corruption, but also when called upon to support the investigations and the systems. Yeah, but most importantly is to shun corruption and say no to corruption.
Mr. Peter Wandera, let's unpack the recommendations before we close this conversation. What role should government be playing as part of this year's theme, which is promoting social accountability through an active citizenry?
Yeah, as already mentioned, the government's most cardinal role is to make sure that the citizens are brought on board. There should be extensive public awareness, there should be extensive sensitization, so that the citizens appreciate that actually they have a role to play. They should not look at it as just a government role or a civil society role. So government should come up and actually make sure that it empowers, because the main mandate to fight corruption is governments. We just come in to supplement. So government should be at the forefront of informing citizens, of making this public awareness and sensitization. Where there are gaps, we can also come in and assist them. Then secondly, government should also fast track the issue of a witness protection regime. Let them make sure that actual witnesses are protected, because citizens won't come out to report. Citizens won't come up to participate in the fight against corruption once they are not sure of their safety. So let government fast track that one. Then they should also make, they should create enabling platforms for reporting corruption, because most of these numbers float around but very few people know them. Most of these offices are very intimidating for a person to work in.
What if the person on the receiving end is also involved in corruption? Will they, how assured am I that they will take on my query or complaint?
Of course.
So we need that actual interface, physical interface between you, the whistleblower, and the person you're talking to, so that you can see that they've submitted my query or complaint. Go ahead, Wanda.
Yeah, there should be information once I make a report. Is there feedback? I should get feedback. Yes. How far is it gone? And I should also I should be made comfortable that, for example, I can report, I can go to Transparency International and report Peter Wandera in confidence. We should create that confidence. There should be strict confidentiality in the reporting system. But once I reach a place to report to, like if you went to a police station to report and the whole counter is filled with policemen, you don't know whom you're reporting to. Maybe the one you're reporting is a brother to the next policeman or the next policewoman. So there should be a friendly environment in which people can come out and report.
And even the avenues through which the whistleblowers can, you know, send those messages of SOS, like the internet. We do have OTT. Someone tell me we should remove OTT. Marlon Agaba.
I think that is an old debate, and I do support it on a personal level, especially now during COVID, where communication is quite hard. We talked about creating an active citizen, where you can't have physical engagements. One of the ways through which you can do that is online, through social media. So I think, yeah, you are right. That one should be removed. It's long overdue.
Go ahead. What government ought to be doing during this time to end corruption?
I think the other important aspect that we need to look at is the aspect of responsiveness. How responsive is government? Because if people are reporting concerns, corruption complaints every year, but the level of responsiveness is too low, I mean, they would not come back again to report. So government has to be responsive. There has to be a deliberate feedback mechanism. Like we have said, we have so many agencies of government with toll-free lines. But how effective are these toll-free lines? How effective are the SMS platforms? You realize that an agency like the State House Anti-Corruption Unit is being seen as effective in the fight against corruption. Why? Because there is something people can see and have trust in the system. So people have to see justice being done. They have to see something being done. But if they report and there is no response at all, that's why the apathy comes in. So that is quite important. But also there are some other pieces of legislation that are quite important that the government should work on. Peter has talked about the witness protection law, which is quite important and long overdue, but also the law on asset recovery. We do have no comprehensive law on asset recovery, which is quite important. So that at least there are processes that even when a person is produced in court, there are processes to freeze their assets. There is a regime to manage the assets, and when they are convicted, to be able to make recoveries. Because if you are losing 3.7 trillion annually and you are collecting only around 20 or less billion, that is a very, very small percentage that has to be increased. And of course, looking at other aspects like the lifestyle audits at institutional level, they're quite important, but also empowering the institutions supposed to be doing this work. The institutions that are constitutionally mandated or mandated by an act of parliament, like the Inspectorate of Government, like now, they are quite silent. Why? They are disempowered. They're not fully constituted. The resources are insufficient. So we need to empower, much as the other institutions are also important, but we need to empower the legally mandated institutions to do their work.
Mr. Wandera, let's remind the various civil society organizations that have been helping us fight corruption and other implementing partners of their role in ending the scourge of corruption. What should be their ideal role moving forward?
Yeah, of course, civil society, you should realize that you're the main avenue through which government reaches the citizen, because we are closer to the citizens. So as civil society, we should come up and continue with our public awareness and sensitization of the masses. We should not give up. We should ensure that actually we empower the masses, we empower the citizens also to be able to appreciate the fight against corruption. Then as civil society, we should be able to inform. Let's not sit on the information that we have, because as civil society we have a lot of information out there, which if shared with the citizen, if shared with government, if shared with the media, is very vital for the fight against corruption. Then of course we should invest more in studies and research, so that whatever we speak, it's from a point of, it's from an informed point, it's from a point of evidence, because with evidence it gives your arguments a stronger basis. Yeah, so let's come up with all these innovations and ensure that actually the citizens that we are rallying to join in the fight against corruption are fully empowered.
In 2 minutes, Malona Gaba, what role should CS also be playing moving forward?
Yeah. Peter has already talked about that, but empowerment of the citizens is quite important. They need to be empowered. Yes, there is a section of citizens that are aware of their responsibilities, but they're either stubbornly or they are just apathetic. They are not doing their work, but there is also a very huge population that is not yet reached that needs to be empowered on their responsibilities. But also the fight against corruption, each one has their different roles. Of course, civil society, we can do the researches, we can engage government, we can advocate, we can empower the citizens to the reporting and to demand, but also the other stakeholders have to do their work. Like the media, for instance, education, and I'm glad that the media increasingly is doing a very good job in terms of exposing corruption, in terms of holding the leaders to account, in terms of asking the tough questions. But also government, like I said, government has, we've already talked about the role of government quite elaborately, and the citizens. But also if other stakeholders, for instance, like the religious leaders could come on board. They're very important opinion leaders. They could do their work in terms of educating the masses, but also in terms of questioning the leaders in terms of of corruption or lack of it. And we have the private sector, we have the cultural institutions. So fighting corruption needs a concerted effort, not just for government or civil society. We can all use our different approaches, but when the goal is the same.
What about inculcating an integrity subject in our syllabi? Would that work?
It can work, and I think some agencies of government have tried to do that. I think the Directorate of Ethics and Integrity has been trying to work around that with the National Curriculum Development Center. But you see, that is good. But if you inculcate anti-corruption modules in the syllabus, and these people go through the education system, but again come into a work environment that is highly corrupt, doesn't it also spoil what has happened? So when you look at all these different components are interconnected, you have to address corruption holistically, not looking at one element. Yeah, you talk about breeding a corruption-free generation, but where is the corruption-free generation going? It's going into a highly corrupt context and environment. So we need to look at the entire environment, we need to address the entire environment, and that calls for strong leadership.
Malona Gaba is the programs manager at the Anti-Corruption Coalition Uganda. He's not alone. He was with Mr. Wandera Peter, the Executive Director, Transparency International Uganda. Many thanks, gentlemen, for having made the time to speak to NTV.
Thanks a lot, Faustin.
And to you at home, we want you to be cognizant of the fact that the fight against corruption is largely hinged on access to information. So we ask the government to open all those avenues through which people can be able to get that information that they need to report on corruption tendencies, or officers or officials who are corrupt in that regard. My name is Romeo Busiku. Many thanks for having made the time to join us. Have yourselves a blessed day. I'll be back here for NTV at 1.